There was a moment, maybe late at night, maybe when you were finally starting to move on, when they almost reached out. They picked up their phone, stared at your name, and felt something they had been trying so hard to bury. But tonight, these cards are showing me that something inside them is beginning to crack. The walls they built around their heart are no longer holding the way they used to. And the reason they couldn't hide it anymore is because the truth they've been carrying all this time is finally starting to rise to the surface. It begins with the first card, and what it reveals about the effort they've been making behind the scenes is something you may not have expected, because while you thought they were simply moving on, they were actually working on themselves. That is exactly what the Eight of Pentacles is showing me. This card is often misunderstood. Most people associate it with work or routine, but at its core, it speaks of repetition, someone staying endlessly busy, hoping constant motion will silence emotions they never truly processed. And that is exactly what happened here. While you were wondering whether they had forgotten you, they buried themselves in work, responsibilities, and routines. They convinced themselves that if they stayed productive long enough, they would eventually stop feeling everything they had left unresolved. For a while, it seemed to work. Every completed task gave them a sense of control. But control is not the same as peace. Control can suppress emotions. Peace allows them to heal. And these cards tell me they never found that peace. From the outside, they looked disciplined, focused, and as though they had moved on. They wanted to become the version of themselves who no longer needed this connection, the person who could hear your name without feeling anything, who could go months without wondering how you were. But every time they believed they had reached that point, something small pulled them back. A familiar song, a meaningful place, a date on the calendar, a conversation that echoed the past. Or sometimes nothing at all. Just the silence at the end of a long day, when every distraction faded and the feelings they had been outrunning quietly returned. Because no amount of work can erase emotions that were never understood. You can bury them beneath responsibilities. You can convince everyone that you've changed. But the heart remembers what the mind refuses to acknowledge. That is the burden this person has been carrying. It was never a lack of love. It was a constant effort to control it, to keep it hidden, because admitting their true feelings would have forced them to confront difficult questions about the choices they made, the distance they created, the silence they maintained, and the opportunities they allowed to slip away. So instead of facing those truths, they kept working, improving, and telling themselves they were moving forward, until something changed. A single spark, a sudden surge of emotion, a moment powerful enough to break through every wall they had spent so long building. And that is exactly what the Ace of Wands is about to reveal. Because after all the discipline, after all the routines, after all the carefully controlled distance, something happened that they never expected. Something broke through. The Ace of Wands is never a quiet card. It does not politely ask for attention. It arrives like a spark landing on dry ground. Suddenly, something that had been sleeping for a very long time begins to breathe again. And I don't think this person was prepared for that. They truly believed they had everything under control. The Eight of Pentacles showed someone who had learned how to keep moving forward without looking back. But the Ace of Wands doesn't care how carefully someone has organized their emotions. It reaches the places that logic cannot touch. It awakens what has been waiting underneath the surface all along. For some of you, this may have happened through a dream they could not explain. They woke up with your energy still surrounding them, wondering why someone they had worked so hard to forget suddenly felt so close again. For others, it may have been a song, not even a song that belonged to your story, just a melody, a single lyric. Something so ordinary that it should have meant nothing. Yet somehow it opened a door they thought had been permanently locked. For some, it was a familiar place. A street they hadn't walked in years, a restaurant, a parking lot, a sunset that looked exactly like one they once shared with you. And in that moment, all the emotional walls they had spent so much time building suddenly felt much weaker than they realized. But what fascinates me most about this card is that the spark itself is only part of the story. The real change happened afterward, because once that feeling returned, they could no longer pretend it wasn't there. Before this, they could distract themselves, work a little harder, stay a little busier, tell themselves they were simply having an emotional day. But this was different. This wasn't just a passing thought. It was a surge, an inner pull that refused to be explained away, almost as if something deep inside them finally whispered, "You've been running long enough. And I keep feeling that this surprised them more than it would surprise you. Because they had invested so much energy into convincing themselves that this chapter was over, that whatever they once felt had faded with time, that enough distance would naturally erase the connection. Instead, they discovered the opposite. Distance had not extinguished the fire. It had only hidden the smoke. And all it took was one unexpected moment, one quiet reminder, one tiny spark for everything underneath to begin burning again. That is why the Ace of Wands feels so powerful here. It is not creating feelings that never existed. It is reigniting feelings that never truly disappeared. It is giving them the courage to acknowledge something they have been avoiding for far too long. Not necessarily to act, not yet, but to finally stop lying to themselves about what still lives inside their heart. And the more I look at these cards, the more I realize this spark did not appear out of nowhere. It was connected to something much older, something unfinished, because the next card keeps pulling me toward memories, toward moments that neither of you truly left behind. And the Six of Cups is about to reveal why those memories are returning with such incredible strength now. This is where everything begins to make so much more sense. The Ace of Wands may have been the spark, but the Six of Cups reveals what that spark awakened. It wasn't just emotion, it was memory. And there is an important difference. Feelings can fade with time, but memories that still carry emotion wait quietly until the heart is ready to face them again. That is exactly what happened here. This person didn't suddenly decide they missed you. It unfolded naturally, almost without their awareness. One memory led to another. One thought opened the door to many more. Before they realized it, they were revisiting moments they had buried for a very long time. The Six of Cups carries a gentle energy. It doesn't force anything. It simply reminds someone of what once felt safe, familiar, and deeply comforting. I don't believe the memories returning are dramatic ones. They're the small moments, the conversations that lasted longer than expected, the way you laughed at something ordinary, the look on your face when you were fully present, the quiet comfort of sharing the same space without needing to say a word. Those are the memories that last, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were genuine. They thought those details had faded forever. But the heart has a remarkable way of preserving what truly mattered. Now, without warning, those forgotten moments keep resurfacing. A familiar phrase, a place you once visited together, a song, a passing smile that suddenly reminds them of you. And everything begins to change. Because once those memories return, they stop seeing your connection as something they simply moved on from. Instead, they remember how they actually felt while they were living it. That is the true power of the Six of Cups. It doesn't romanticize the past, it reconnects someone with the emotional truth they try to rewrite, and that truth is difficult to ignore. Every memory brings another question. Did they walk away too soon? Did fear speak louder than love? Were they protecting their heart or simply avoiding vulnerability? The more they remember, the harder it becomes to pretend none of it mattered. Deep down, they know the connection was real. The feelings were real, and that is why this wave of nostalgia feels so overwhelming. It isn't pulling them backward because they're stuck. It's pulling them inward toward emotions they never truly finished processing. But these cards also offer an important reminder. Remembering is not the same as knowing what to do next. Even with their heart awakening, they are still standing before a decision they have avoided for far longer than you realize. And that is exactly what the Two of Swords is about to reveal. And that brings us to the question that has quietly lingered beneath this entire reading. If they still miss you, if these memories keep returning, if their feelings never truly disappeared, then why haven't they done anything? This is exactly where the Two of Swords steps in. Like the Eight of Pentacles, this card is often misunderstood. Many people see it as simple indecision, but that is not the energy I feel here. This is something much deeper. This is emotional paralysis. Every path they considered seemed to come with a painful loss. If they reached out, they feared discovering you had already moved on. If they stayed silent, they risked losing you forever. And if they admitted what they truly felt, they would have to confront everything they had spent so long avoiding: the distance, the misunderstandings, the choices made from fear instead of love. That is why this card keeps repeating the same message. They were never emotionally detached. They were emotionally overwhelmed. There is a world of difference between those two. Someone who no longer cares walks away without looking back. Someone who is overwhelmed keeps looking back, but never finds the courage to turn around. That is the energy surrounding this connection. Each time they thought about contacting you, doubt stepped in. What if they don't want to hear from me anymore? What if too much time has passed? What if I already ruined everything? Instead of answering those questions, they postponed them. They convinced themselves they simply needed more time, a better opportunity, or a clearer sign. But life rarely waits for perfect timing. Clarity doesn't always come before the decision. Sometimes it only arrives after someone chooses to take the first step. While they waited, time quietly kept moving. Days became months. Months became memories. And opportunities slipped away without either of you realizing they might never return in exactly the same way. That is the heartbreak within this card. Not that love disappeared, but that silence slowly became a decision of its own. The Six of Cups showed us that the memories never left them. But memories alone cannot rebuild a relationship. Nostalgia can keep someone's heart attached for years, yet it cannot create a new beginning. Only courage can, and courage is exactly what they struggle to find, because reaching out would mean more than admitting they still cared. It would mean accepting responsibility for everything that happened while they remained silent. I keep seeing someone standing before a closed door, reaching for the handle, only to pull their hand back at the last moment, again and again, until hesitation became a habit, until silence felt safer than vulnerability. But these cards reveal something even deeper. The hesitation was never the real problem. It was only the symptom. Beneath all the waiting, all the fear, and all the unfinished emotions, there was an imbalance that quietly shaped this entire connection. And the next card is about to reveal exactly what that imbalance was. And this is where the reading becomes even more honest. The Two of Swords revealed the hesitation, but hesitation was only the surface. The deeper issue was imbalance. That is exactly what the Six of Pentacles brings into focus. This card is not asking who loved more. It is asking how love was being exchanged. Those are two very different questions. Somewhere along the way, one person slowly began carrying more of the emotional weight, not through one dramatic event, but through countless small moments, one compromise, one unanswered message, one more chance, until giving became a habit and receiving became uncertain. So ask yourself, who usually reached out after the silence? Who kept believing one more conversation could change everything? Who kept offering understanding while secretly longing to be understood? And perhaps the hardest question of all, who believed that loving harder would eventually make the other person choose differently? I don't believe either of you intended for the relationship to become this unbalanced. Sometimes it happens so gradually that neither person notices until the connection is already leaning to one side. One person keeps giving because love comes naturally. The other keeps receiving, slowly assuming that this love will always be there, not out of cruelty, but because it becomes familiar. Another chance, another conversation, another open door. And sometimes it is only when that door finally closes that someone realizes what it was protecting. That is why this card feels deeper than guilt. It feels like recognition, the kind that only arrives through absence. When someone is always there, their kindness can begin to feel ordinary. Their patience becomes expected. Their forgiveness seems endless. But once that presence disappears, the silence reveals everything that had quietly been taken for granted. That is why I keep thinking back to the Eight of Pentacles. All the work, all the distractions, all the effort to stay busy. Perhaps it was never just an attempt to forget. Perhaps it became the inner work they had avoided for so long, not work that changed their circumstances, but work that slowly changed their understanding. Because some lessons cannot be learnt while everything still feels secure. They only become clear after loss, after distance, after realizing the person who once carried so much of the relationship is no longer carrying it for you. So I want to gently ask you something as well. Were you giving simply because your heart loved naturally? Or were you quietly hoping that if you loved enough, they would finally choose you the way you had already chosen them? There is no judgment in that question. Only an invitation to understand your own heart with the same compassion these cards are asking you to offer theirs. Because once someone truly recognizes the value of what they lost, once they understand the emotional home they once stood inside without fully appreciating it, that is often when the deepest pain doesn't end. It begins. And I think that is exactly why the Three of Swords appears here. Not to reopen an old wound, but to reveal where it has been hiding all this time. This card is often associated with betrayal or heartbreak, but the energy I feel is much quieter. Sometimes the deepest pain isn't created when two people walk away. Sometimes it is created by everything that never found the courage to exist. The conversation that was always postponed. The apology hidden behind pride. The truth that almost came out, only to disappear back into silence. I miss you. I was afraid. I still care. I didn't know how to fix this. Words that lived inside the heart but never reached the lips. That kind of heartbreak lingers differently because there is no clear ending, only unanswered questions. I believe this person convinced themselves they could outrun those feelings. They buried themselves in work, responsibilities, routines, and distractions, hoping time would accomplish what courage never could. But time has a way of exposing what remains unresolved. It softens some memories, yet makes the unspoken ones echo even louder. Because what is never expressed never truly disappears. It simply waits until the heart is ready to face it. Every card before this has shown someone trying to stay in control, convincing themselves that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. The Three of Swords reveals the cost of that choice. You can avoid a conversation. You cannot erase its absence. You can silence your feelings. You cannot stop them from shaping your life beneath the surface. And there is something else this card quietly reveals. Even while they tried to move on, a part of them never completely stopped paying attention. They wondered how you were, whether you had found peace, whether you were happier than they were. It wasn't obsession. It was the small part of their heart that never fully closed the door. That is exactly what prepares us for the Page of Swords, because some connections continue speaking even when no words are exchanged. But this card also carries a lesson for you. Sometimes heartbreak isn't here to punish us. Sometimes it arrives to break apart the version of ourselves that accepted less than we deserved, the version that mistook silence for safety, believed carrying a relationship alone was love, or kept waiting for someone else to become ready. Pain exposes where love stopped flowing freely, not so you remain there, but so you recognize that you deserve something healthier. And perhaps that lesson has been unfolding for both of you. Because true appreciation often arrives only after absence reveals what was quietly taken for granted. Yet, as painful as this card feels, it is not the end. Because after all this heartbreak, the next card brings something very different. It brings hope. And that is why the star appears now. Not to erase everything that came before it, but to remind you that heartbreak was never meant to be the final chapter. It was the turning point. After the Three of Swords strips away every excuse, every defense, and every illusion, something remarkable begins to happen. The truth no longer feels like something to fear. It begins to feel like something that can finally set both of you free. That is the deeper message of the star. Most people see this card as healing, and it certainly is, but real healing is more than moving on. It is being able to look back without rewriting the story, without denying the love, without exaggerating the pain, without clinging to fantasy or hiding behind fear. It is simply seeing the connection for what it truly was. And that kind of honesty brings peace. What I keep sensing is that something inside this person has quietly changed. Whether they have reached out or remained silent, their inner world is no longer the same. The walls they built once felt like protection. Now they feel like isolation. There comes a moment when someone realizes that the very walls meant to protect the heart have also kept love from reaching it. I believe they are standing in that realization now. Not with every answer, not completely transformed, but more honest with themselves than they have been in a very long time. Perhaps something similar has been happening within you as well, because heartbreak changes both people. Not in the same way, not at the same pace, but neither of you leaves it unchanged. Sometimes pain becomes the place where compassion quietly begins for yourself, for the version of them who acted from fear instead of clarity, and for everything neither of you knew how to express when it mattered most. That is one of the star's greatest gifts. It doesn't promise that every story ends with two people finding their way back to each other. It promises something more truthful. Healing makes honesty impossible to ignore. If two people are meant to rebuild, they can only do it through truth, not longing, fantasy, or wishful thinking. And if they are meant to walk separate paths, healing allows them to carry gratitude instead of bitterness. Either way, fear slowly loses its grip. The heart stops resisting what is true. And that is where real peace begins. Because these cards were never meant to keep you trapped in the past. They were meant to help you see this connection with clear eyes, an open heart, and expectations grounded in truth rather than illusion. And once someone finally stops running from their feelings, they begin paying attention in ways they never did before. Because once someone finally stops running from their feelings, they begin paying attention in ways they never did before. That is exactly where the Page of Swords enters this reading. This card is often misunderstood. Many people immediately think it represents someone secretly watching from a distance or checking social media. That can happen, but it is not the strongest energy I feel here. What I sense is much quieter. The Page of Swords marks the moment curiosity turns inward. Instead of searching for answers outside themselves, they begin observing their own heart with honesty. That is a very different kind of awakening. They replay conversations they once dismissed. They remember moments they barely noticed at the time. They revisit situations they thought they understood, only to realize they may have misunderstood them completely. The Page of Swords does not pretend to have every answer. Instead, it asks better questions. Why has this connection stayed with me when so many others faded? Why has moving on been so much harder than I expected? Why do I still remember the smallest details? Why does their absence still have such a powerful presence? Those are the questions surrounding this card. And notice something important. Questions do not immediately create action. Observation comes first. Understanding follows. Only then can someone choose a different path. That is why I would never rush this energy. This card is not about dramatic declarations. It is about becoming emotionally honest enough to admit that you don't understand everything you once believed you did. That is where real wisdom begins. Curiosity replaces certainty. Old assumptions begin to fall away. Fear is questioned instead of defended. And perhaps the most meaningful realization of all is this. They are beginning to see your role in this connection differently. Not as someone who expected too much, not as someone who was difficult to understand, but as someone whose emotional presence they never fully appreciated while they still had the chance. That realization cannot change the past, but it can transform the way they carry it. Every card has quietly led to this moment, not a moment of certainty, but a moment of awareness, because awareness is where every genuine transformation begins. And yet, even this is not the deepest truth these cards are revealing, because what they are finally discovering isn't only about you. It's about something they have been hiding from themselves all along, and that is why the High Priestess is the final card. Not because she offers easy answers, but because she quietly reveals the truth that has been waiting beneath the surface all along. If you look back at every card we have explored together, the Seven of Swords, Eight of Pentacles, Ace of Wands, Six of Cups, Two of Swords, Six of Pentacles, Three of Swords, the Star, and Page of Swords, they have all been pointing toward the same message, not from different directions, but from deeper and deeper layers. The greatest mystery was never whether this person had feelings for you, it was how long they had been hiding those feelings, even from themselves. Fear became one layer, pride became another, waiting for the perfect time became another. Old wounds, unhealed pain, and the belief that vulnerability was dangerous covered what never truly disappeared. Not a loud, fearless love, but a quiet love buried beneath everything they had not yet learned to face. That is what makes the High Priestess so powerful. She never forces the truth. She simply allows it to become impossible to ignore. Quietly, patiently, at exactly the right moment. That is why this final card feels so peaceful. There is no longer any need to chase answers or search endlessly for proof. Because emotional truth feels different from emotional uncertainty. It does not demand attention. It settles gently into the heart, becoming something you recognize long before your mind can explain it. Perhaps that is why you were drawn to this reading in the first place. I don't believe everything you've heard today is entirely new. Maybe you couldn't put it into words. Maybe you questioned your own instincts. But deep down, your intuition was already telling you this connection was more complex than it appeared on the surface. The High Priestess asks you to trust that quiet inner knowing, not because intuition is always perfect, but because your deepest wisdom rarely speaks through fear. It speaks through stillness, through the moments when you stop chasing answers long enough to hear your own heart. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of this entire reading. Not discovering what lives inside someone else's heart, but realizing you no longer need uncertainty to define your own. Whether this connection finds its way back together or gently continues on separate paths, the truth still has value. because clarity is its own form of healing. It frees you from endless guessing. It frees you from carrying stories that were never yours to carry. And it allows you to love without losing yourself in the process. So if there is one message to take with you, it is this. Their true feelings were never the greatest secret. The greatest secret was how long they tried to convince themselves those feelings weren't real. And now, whether they are ready to speak them or not, the silence can no longer hide them. Trust what resonates, release what doesn't, and allow your own inner wisdom to guide whatever comes next. Because in the end, that quiet voice within you has been leading you toward the truth all along. As we come to the end of this reading, I want you to notice something. This was never really a story about whether someone loved you. It became a story about what happens when love meets fear. Throughout this reading, one truth kept revealing itself. The feelings were never empty. What these cards showed was someone who tried to bury their emotions beneath work, routines, distance, and pride, believing time would do what courage never could. Yet every step they took away from those feelings somehow led them back to the same place. Not because the past refused to let them go, but because there was something inside themselves they had never truly faced. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of this journey. Sometimes the greatest distance between two people is not measured in miles. It is measured in the words left unsaid and the vulnerability that never found its voice. But this reading was never only about their transformation. It was about yours as well. Maybe you stopped asking, why didn't they choose me? And started asking, what has this taught me about the way I love? That is where real healing begins. Not when someone else finally recognizes your worth, but when you no longer need them to. Whether this connection has another chapter or has already fulfilled its purpose, truth remains the greatest gift. Keep what resonates, release what doesn't. Trust the quiet wisdom already living within you. Because these cards did not create your intuition. They simply reflected what your heart has known all along. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Until next time, take care of your heart. It has always known the way home.